Hello and welcome to Board Game Madness. We are in the Elite 8 or the top 8 of my collection, so it's getting harder and harder to choose which games go through. Today we have the number 10 seed Cartographers versus the number 18th seed Clank Catacombs. And I can tell you that this is going to be a tough one because if you were to ask me what some of my favorite games in my collection are, both of these games would be some of the ones I would recommend or say are in my top 5. So as always, if you want to see more about these games, go back to some of our earlier videos in the series. In this one, we're going to jump right in. We're going to try to focus on value for your game for your dollar, and we're going to cover each category and try to break it down as best we can to make this decision by the books. And with that, we'll get started with production. So here with production, we have two very disparately priced games. We've got Cartographers, which is going to be $20 to $30, and Clank Catacombs, which is $60 probably, $50 to $60 maybe. You can find it online. Obviously a much bigger box too, so you're inherently expecting more out of this box than here. And Cartographers, from a production standpoint, does nothing wrong, but the game just doesn't require a lot of components. It has 100 map sheets, they're double-sided at least, 41 cards, a rule book, and 4 pencils. That's it. That's all that's in this box. This has a lot more: dungeon tiles, clank board, 180 plus cards, 140 punch tokens, market board, cubes, dragon cubes, ghost cubes, cloth dragon mark, dragon meeple, rules, player meeples. There's just a lot more going on in this game. And it should. It costs a lot more. So the question is, when it comes to production, if we were to equalize these price points, and if these games, if we scaled this game down to cost $20, what would we sort of be left with, and what could we compare? So let's talk first about the art and general aesthetics of the game art. So Cartographers has a beautiful cover. I think the cards you flip over are very nicely drawn. It takes place in the role player universe, which is sort of a generic Dungeons and Dragons style fantasy world. There's goblins, monsters, and things like that, which you'll see on some of the cards. And then there's some scoring cards, which don't look quite as good as the other cards you flip over. Clank Catacombs, as a deck builder, has 180 cards. You have a big market of cards to buy from, and you have a different aesthetic. You have much more of like a cartoon, fun aesthetic. So, if I had to choose sort of art styles, I slightly prefer, it's not like this is a huge difference, but I do slightly prefer the more serious tone of the artwork in Cartographers than Clank, which has some inside jokes, and like I said, it's about having a good time. I don't dislike the artwork. I just think that this is a slight step above the artwork in Clank. Artwork, so we're talking about like illustrations only, because I do find, I guess there's nothing wrong with the graphic design in Cartographers. I do think you need to spell out each scoring card for everyone to make sure everyone knows how it's scored. But I also really like the graphic design symbology of the catacombs and on the cards in Clank. I think that whole side of it is very solid. I also really like the artwork of all the treasures and things you find in the catacombs. And I like the art in general. I think this artwork is slightly better. So this artwork is slightly better, but there is a lot more artwork here in degree of cards and amount of cards. And I think even if you controlled for price point, the best way to probably do that would to say, if I had Cartographers and like Cartographers Heroes, like the expansion, or some of the map packs, like how would production compare? And I think even if I had a bunch of map packs, $30 worth of map packs, or the other standalone version of this game, or the higher price, like bigger box version of this game, I still think the production of Catacombs and Clank slightly edges out what Cartographers is trying to do. It's not that it's the most deluxe game ever. It's just you're getting a lot more. There's a lot more components. There's a lot more aspects of the game going on than just drawing on a map and flipping over cards. So it inherently sort of has a higher production value, more table presence, in my opinion. So this is a close one, but I'm going to go with Clank. Okay, so let's move on to game mechanics. This is going to be really tough for me because, as I mentioned, these are among my favorite games, and while they're not very similar, they do some of the strongest things in each genre that I like the most. Clank's one of my favorite deck building games. Cartographers is definitely my favorite roll and flip game. So, how are we going to break this down and sort of see which genre is more important to me, I guess? Cartographers is great because I can play it with any player count. Everyone can sort of enjoy it, even if they're not playing for the game. There are people that just enjoy sort of drawing and being included in activity. So I think it's great as a gateway game too. So those are some of the pros for it. Some of the cons are that I played this core box a bunch. There's only 2 different maps in it, and I played all the scoring cards. I've definitely seen all the content pretty quickly. It is only a $20 game, but the replayability is really just about how much you enjoy it and how the different scoring options are. There's not really much else going on other than the scoring cards and objectives. Clank, on the other hand, I played a bunch when I first got it and my friends got it. I think we actually played it like 2 or 3 days in a row, multiple times in a row. I really enjoy, it's my favorite Clank by far. I love the deck building mechanic. I feel like there's a lot of good cards in this particular set. And I love the randomized dungeon. I mean, that is such a huge shift compared to the other Clanks that gives this one so much more depth to it because, each time you explore and go off the board, you're sort of exploring a new thing and can sort of set the board up to be most advantageous to your future deck drawing. It's really fun. There's some great lockpick mechanics with how you move through the dungeon and other market items. Like everything about the game has just been refined and iterated a lot on, so I do really enjoy it. So this really comes down to taste, I think. And for me, if you ask me which game I wanted to play right now, I would pick Clank. Now, if there are other people in my group that I was playing with, they could influence me and tell me to play Cartographers. Obviously, I love the game, and if someone said, I'd really rather play Cartographers, I'd be like, sure, great. But if my own personal preference would be to play Clank. And if I was talking to somebody who didn't know either game, I would really push Clank harder than Cartographers because it's a pretty easy game to teach as well. It's a little heavier than Cartographers, but not immensely so. So for me, game mechanics, I really have to go Clank Catacombs. It's one of my favorite deck builders, and I love deck building, and there's so many different cards and strategies you can use with this card set. You can focus on getting rid of Clank, you can focus on movement, you can focus on, attack, you can focus on, just building points, like raw points in your deck. It's just my favorite. So for mechanics, I'd have to go Clank Catacombs. Okay, the next category is theme. And as I mentioned in sort of the production round earlier, as far as sort of art direction goes and artwork goes, I would give Cartographers the slight edge on the illustrations. But a game's theme isn't about just the illustrations. Cartographers has this great marriage of theme with the actual actions you're doing in the game of drawing the map. I do, as I mentioned in the previous videos and the previous rounds of this things, it's one of the strongest connections of the name of the game, the theme of the game with what you're actually doing. I mean, you're literally drawing a map and the game's called Cartographers. But meanwhile, Clank Catacombs is an incredible marriage of theme as well. You are running through a dungeon. It's literally made up of catacombs that are constantly shifting, trying to get the most treasure and escape without dying. So we have 2 really close. I think both these games, the mechanics and theme, really lend themselves to one another. And while I do slightly prefer Cartographer's artwork, the mechanisms in Clank and the intricacies of Clank, this is just drawing a map. And the thing that makes the least amount of sense in this game is the fact that drawing a map a certain way and creating a map a certain way generates more points. It's almost like you can manipulate the world. You're not recording what you find. You're like manipulating the landscape a little bit by choosing where things go. Clank, there's no disconnect in the theme at all, in my opinion. You're moving your piece through the map. You're uncovering secrets and treasure, scoring points, and constantly leveling up and upgrading your deck as you go through. So, both of these are really strong theme. There is something magical about drawing a map with Cartographers, but there is that disconnect in like, I'm not drawing things where things are, I'm sort of creating where things go. It's not like I'm recording the landscape, I'm drawing a map however I want, which gives you sort of this like godlike power, I guess, to create any map you want. Whereas Clank, there's no disconnect in the theme at all for me. Racing through the catacombs, finding the treasure, escaping, and building your deck all fits within this sort of fun, cartoonish dungeon building quite well. I don't know, maybe I should call it a tie. It's pretty close. I mean, it's really close. I like the artwork better over here. I love the fact that I'm actually drawing a map in Cartographers. But there is that disconnect with, I'm not drawing an actual map of what I'm discovering, I'm just sort of choosing where stuff goes. But I guess maybe it's like we're journeying in different locations and we're drawing what we find as we go. And we're journeying off into the hillsides and the rivers in different directions, and we're all sort of drawing our own maps. I can take that leap. Whereas Clank is exactly what you see on this board too, though. It's a huge fun dungeon crawler. I'm gonna go with tie. I can't pick one theme stronger than the other here. I think replayability should be the end goal here. So let's take it to that. And I have to, when we come to talk about replayability, I have to take into account that Clank is newer and I've played it less times so far. I played Cartographers an immense number of times. And because I played it more, Cartographers is starting to, this box of Cartographers, I'm getting to that point where I need the expansion box and I need additional maps, additional map packs. That's where I'm approaching in Cartographers. Not that I wouldn't play the base box, but I know for a fact I've played almost every scoring condition, and I feel like I've played the main map one too many times. I'd still play the reverse side of the map that's in the core box, but I'm reaching that point where I really need more content for Cartographers. Clank Catacombs, I've played probably half a dozen times so far since I've gotten it, maybe 8, something like that. And I still want to, I mean, just looking at the back of the box, I want to play it again. I want to play it with my kids. I want to create new maps. The fact that a new map is created every time I play, and it's not like the old Clank, where I can really master my strategy and path through the dungeon, is huge. It's massive. It gives it so much more replayability than any other Clank before it. I mean, it literally, the original Clank, to get a second board, you needed to have the underwater expansion. And then the sci-fi version gave you like these modular 4 pieces that could be flipped a couple different ways. But each piece sort of had its own route through stuff. So you could only change things up so much. And that added a lot to replayability. And now we've gotten to this point where this map has infinite replayability effectively. And what's even better is that any future expansions could give you more catacomb tiles to mix and match with this base game. So instead of being like, I'm playing this board, I'm playing this board, I can just mix in new tiles to this board to give me more permutations on this version of the game that I like so much, is huge. So while I have played Clank a little less, I played it at least 6 times, and it's a $60 game that's $10 a play. Cartographers is only $20, and I played it more than 10 times, so it's like $2 a play. So if you're looking at like value for replayability, I need to play this, at least 6 more times, if not more. But I would do it. I would still do it. I feel like replayability in Clank Catacombs is there, man. There's only 2 maps in it. So once I played through all the objectives, as much fun as this is, and as many times I've played the same map over and over again, and some of the same scoring conditions over and over again, to teach this to new people, the excitement is waning in this around 10 to 12 plays. Clank Catacombs, I'm at 6 or 8, and I'd play another 6 or 8 over the next 3 days if you ask me. I just love the game, and I think there's so many different things. And just as this a lot more comes to Cartographers, if you add more maps to it, you can do the same thing here, except I think for every catacomb tile you add in here, you get even more replayability because it's not set in stone. You're not picking a map at the start of the game that you're locked into, like you are in old Clanks or in Cartographers. Every catacomb tile I shuffle in here gives me new maze pieces that I can construct. And then every new card you add to the center market gives additional cards and strategies you can build for. I mean, you could probably swap out some of the core center decks from the old Clanks and it would work in Catacombs. So Catacombs for me, if you ask me which game I wanted to play now, it'd be Catacombs. If you ask me about replayability in the future, I still see tons of replayability with Catacombs. Cartographers, I need that expansion. But because this is so much cheaper, if you're looking at value per player, dollar per player, this is going to be, and nothing's going to pass that in this category, honestly. If you look at the number of plays you can get for your dollar, I bet you no game in my collection can do better than Cartographers. But that doesn't mean it has the most replayability. It just means at this price point of $20, you're going to play this game, you're going to get your $20 worth, I guarantee it. 20, 30 bucks. You're going to get your 20 or 30 buck value out of Cartographers. It's a good enough game. I guarantee you're going to play it and get your money's worth out of it and have a great experience. I think for 60 bucks, you're going to get a great experience out of Clank too. And ultimately it comes down to my personal preference in this moment. And for me, Clank Catacombs, just looking at the back here with these catacomb tiles, has me excited to build a new map and play it again and figure out how to get the lockpicks and things I need to get through it. So it's close, and I absolutely adore Cartographers, but I think I have to give it to Clank here. It's certainly the way I would lean. So let's go back through my head here and see how well I can remember things and see if we have a winner if we need to go to overtime. So for production is very clearly Clank. Even though it's more expensive, it does give you a lot more. And if you were to take that dollar per card per component in this game and dollar per component in this game, you are going to get a lot more for your dollar in components here, in number of components, quality of components, etc. So I think Clank is clearly the superior product as far as production goes. Now, when we talked about game mechanics, is that what we did next? Game mechanics? Game mechanics, I think, is Clank too. I mean, it's close. It's close, but I would go with mechanics for Clank as well. It just has a little more depth for me. And then with theme, I said theme was a tie. I think it is close. I'd lean a little more towards Cartographers. So in the face of retrospect, let's say that it's pretty close. It's almost a tie, but we lean and give that to Cartographers. We're left with replayability, which is also very close. If we called it a tie, Clank still has the lead over production and game mechanics. It's winning in those first 2 categories. So even if theme and replayability are a tie, or I slightly lean towards Cartographers, in replayability, frankly, I lean towards Clank. That's going to win it for it. So Clank's going to move on, and we're going to have a big upset here when it comes to at least what the rankings out there say. I have a feeling it's the BGG rankings. It's more because Clank Catacombs was new, and you need a certain number of ratings before something really starts shooting up the chart. But So we'll see how angry people are out there. But I do think Clank, I have to put Clank Catacombs through. It's one of the favorite games of my collection. Obviously, both of these games are in my top 8. But I do think, even with the price differential, I think the only thing Cartographers gives you is it gives you the best value per dollar of any game in my collection. I think the number of plays you'll get for the dollars you spend on Cartographers is the best in my collection. But in production, overall production, even taking into account price point, in replayability, in game mechanics, I have to go Clank. So Clank's going to move on. I'm sorry for everyone out there that I'm upset. We have an upset. Even in the Elite 8, we can still have upsets. And for me, I've got to put Clank Catacombs through. I'd give it one of my highest recommendations. It's definitely one of my top 4 games. So I'm happy to put it through in this round. So with that, I'll sign off for now and say thank you for watching. This is the time I remind you to subscribe so you don't miss any of the last few videos we have coming through with Board Game Madness. We'll have a playlist for you guys where you can watch them all together too after the fact. But please like and subscribe to this video, and we will see you in the next video in the next round of the tournament. Thanks so much for watching.